You tell yourself that you are lazy, and over time that idea becomes something you accept without questioning, something that feels like a stable explanation for everything you avoid. It becomes automatic. You don't examine it, you don't challenge it, you simply apply it. Every time you don't start, every time you delay, every time you choose something easier instead of something important, the answer appears instantly. You are lazy. And because that explanation is simple, it feels correct. It removes the need to think further. It replaces observation with conclusion. But if you stop and observe your behavior without immediately labeling it, a different structure becomes visible. Your actions are not randomly inconsistent. They follow patterns. There are areas of your life where you act consistently without effort, where repetition happens naturally, where discipline is not required at all. You perform certain actions daily, without hesitation, without resistance, without needing to push yourself. And this is not accidental. These actions feel natural because they align with your current understanding, your expectations, and the way you interpret their value. That contradiction is important, because if laziness was the real problem, inconsistency would appear everywhere. But it doesn't. It appears only in specific situations, especially when something feels important, uncertain, or undefined. That means the issue is not laziness itself, but a specific form of resistance that appears under certain conditions. And that resistance is not random. It is connected to how you perceive the situation in front of you. When something feels unclear, when the outcome is uncertain, when the process is not fully understood, hesitation appears. And that hesitation is not passive. It influences your behavior directly. It shifts your attention, it redirects your focus, it creates avoidance. And instead of recognizing that hesitation as a signal, you label it as laziness. But that label hides the cause. It simplifies the behavior without explaining it. And because the cause is hidden, you try to fix the behavior directly. You try to force action, to create pressure, to impose discipline. And for a short time, this can work. You override the resistance, you act, you create movement. But that movement is unstable, because the resistance has not been removed. It has only been suppressed. And when the pressure disappears, the same hesitation returns. And when it returns, you repeat the same conclusion, that you are lazy. But that conclusion does not solve the pattern. It sustains it, because it prevents you from seeing what is actually happening beneath your behavior. And as long as you continue to interpret your actions this way, the pattern will repeat, regardless of how much effort you apply to changing it. The real reason behind that pattern is not laziness, but fear. Not always obvious fear, not something you clearly recognize, but a subtle response that shapes your decisions before you are even aware of it. Every time you hesitate, your mind evaluates the situation. It looks at the possible outcome, the level of uncertainty, and the amount of control you believe you have over what will happen next. This evaluation happens instantly. You don't notice it, but it defines your reaction. If something feels unclear, unstable, or unpredictable, resistance appears. That resistance is not random. It is a protective response. Your mind avoids what it cannot clearly understand or control. And the less clarity you have, the stronger that response becomes. But instead of recognizing that process, you focus only on the result. You feel hesitation and call it laziness. You feel resistance and call it lack of discipline. But what you are actually experiencing is a reaction to uncertainty. And because it does not feel like obvious fear, you do not question it. It appears as distraction, as delay, as the feeling that you will do it later, and you follow that feeling automatically. Over time, this creates a pattern. You avoid actions that matter, not because you don't want them, but because something about them feels undefined or unstable. When you cannot clearly predict the outcome, your mind interprets it as risk. When you do not understand the process, your mind interprets it as lack of control. And lack of control creates tension. That tension does not disappear on its own. It stays in the background and influences your behavior, even when you are not aware of it. It affects your focus, your decisions, and the direction of your attention. Instead of resolving it, you try to override it. You push yourself, you force action. You apply pressure, believing that effort can replace clarity. And in the short term, it works. You create movement through force, but that force does not remove the cause. It only suppresses the response. And suppression requires continuous effort. The moment you stop pushing, the same resistance returns. because the perception behind it has not changed. And when it returns, you interpret it as failure. You think you lost discipline, that you could not stay consistent, but nothing actually changed. The situation is still interpreted in the same way, so the response is the same. And that is why the pattern repeats. You are not lacking discipline. You are reacting to a perception that creates uncertainty and tension. And as long as that perception remains unclear, your behavior will follow the same structure, no matter how much effort you apply. Because action does not depend only on effort. It depends on how clearly you understand what you are doing, what will happen, and why it matters. Without that clarity, resistance will always appear. Once you begin to see this pattern clearly, the way you approach your actions changes at a fundamental level. Instead of asking why you're lazy, you start asking what exactly you are avoiding and why that avoidance appears in specific situations. You begin to observe the moments where hesitation occurs, where your attention shifts, where your motivation disappears. And instead of reacting immediately, instead of trying to force action, you allow yourself to see what is happening. You notice the thoughts that appear, the assumptions that form, the uncertainty that shapes your perception. And through that observation, a structure becomes visible. Your behavior is not random. It follows how you interpret each situation. And once that structure becomes clear, the need for force begins to decrease. Because understanding changes behavior at its source. When something is clear, when the direction makes sense, when the outcome feels meaningful and defined, action becomes natural. It does not require the same level of effort, because there is no internal conflict preventing movement. You do not need to push yourself, because there is nothing to push against. And that is the difference between forced discipline and natural consistency. One depends on pressure, the other on clarity. And clarity removes friction. It aligns your intention with your understanding. But when that alignment is missing, resistance appears. And that resistance is not an obstacle, it is information. It shows you that something is not fully understood, that there's a gap between what you think you should do and what you actually understand. And instead of ignoring that gap, you can explore it. You can question your assumptions, your expectations, your reasons for acting. You can examine whether the direction itself is clear, whether the outcome is meaningful, whether the process makes sense to you. And as that clarity increases, the need for discipline decreases, because action no longer requires constant effort. It becomes consistent without pressure. You are no longer forcing movement. You are allowing movement by removing what was blocking it, and that is the shift. Discipline is not the foundation of consistent action. It is the result of clarity. When there is no confusion, no internal contradiction, no hidden resistance, action becomes simple. And maybe that is the truth you were avoiding. Not that you are lazy, but that you have been trying to force action without understanding the structure behind it. And once that structure becomes clear, everything changes. Not through effort, but through awareness. Not through control, but through clarity. Not through pressure, but through understanding. And that change is stable because it does not depend on constant force. It depends on seeing clearly. And once something is seen clearly, it no longer needs to be forced. It becomes part of how you act.